Football season literally cannot get here soon enough, and Ken and I are so jazzed about it that we decided to do a Power Rankings episode in the middle of the frickin' summer. That's right. This is the Big Ten Country Football Power Rankings special. He is Kenneth Davis. I am James Neveau. We are here to go over the teams that we think are the best in the Big Ten this season and who we think should be the top dog heading into August. But before we get started, Mr. Ken Davis, how are you doing, man? How was your 4th of July weekend? Are all 10 fingers still intact?
Yeah, I have not broken the law in a while because I have a fear of Kelsey something going wrong, even though one day I plan on giving her a little fireworks experience. She's around the age where Kenton had his. I got to tell you the story one day when I knew he was one of the ones. It was an incident took place, and I was running through my garage as this huge rocket was exploding. Just to give you an example, the stem on this large rocket, it fell and broke off. The rocket shot across the alley, hit the side of a garage, went to the gutter of the garage, James, and it paused like this, right?
Oh, geez.
Imagine like this rocket is rudderless. It paused in the air. Then it went back down onto the concrete across the alley. Now it explodes in phases. So now it's entering into the sparkle phase. So
God.
Mind you, now Afton's in the house. If she was in the house, we would have had to stop playing with fireworks. It's me, my then best friend, and one of my close friends, which is his wife, right? We're all scrambling in Kenton. As I'm scrambling, I look to my right? I look down, and my son is hauling with me. At that moment, I knew my child has it. The natural instincts to haul when it needs to be hauled. And I was running.
Wow.
I knew he was going to be safe at that moment, James. So then the crazy thing is, and nobody, this is bad. This is part of the reason why I haven't been popping fireworks. The best thing was after it all ended, the first thing we did was everybody grab some fireworks, right? It was like, yo. So anyway, but no, I've been sick this week. Me and the family came back from vacation with COVID. So I missed out on some family gatherings. And let's be honest with you, I'm not really in that type of mood to do anything fireworks wise. It hasn't been in me. What about you, James? Do you have all of your fingers and toes?
All of them still attached. Did not have any unfortunate Jason Pierre-Paul. Was it Jason Pierre-Paul?
Yes.
Okay. I could never remember if it was him or Yumamura, so I wanted to make sure of that. My neighbors shot off a bunch of fireworks, so I naturally did what any good citizen would do. I waited until he was done, and then I gave him a very nice pour of some nice Weller bourbon as a way of saying thank you for allowing me to partake in the spectacle without risking life or limb to see the show. So that was certainly an interesting experience, and one of those things where living across the street from a soybean field was very beneficial because we just basically got free reign on the streets, act like a bunch of, jerks. So always gotta love that, man. I hope everybody out there in Big Ten country also had a really good weekend and a really safe weekend, most importantly of all. But Ken, I know one thing that is going to absolutely, without a doubt, cure any sort of lingering illness you have from COVID, and that's talking about some college football. And so before we get started, I want to ask you this because we did not discuss it before the show. Do you want to go 1 to 10 in our power rankings? Because we're only doing 10 teams. We are not going to do all 18. Sorry to you fine folks who are, maybe fans of a team that isn't even in the top 10 right now. Looking at you, Indiana, right now. Right. Do you want to do 1 to 10 or do you want to do 10 to 1?
It's probably, I guess, 10 to 1, even though, when we get to the top, I think that's going to be kind of easy to pick out.
Oh,
okay. I don't think we'll have the same people. I just think
we'll have them in different orders.
Yeah, different orders.
I can go with that. And I think where you're going to start to get really interesting in these rankings is when we decide what level of our power ranking we actually consider the team to be a contender to get into the 12-team college football playoff. Because remember, that starts this season. And so you could have, 3 teams potentially from the Big Ten playing in that college football playoff. And so we have a lot to get to with that, but we will get started as per Ken's request, with the number 10 team on his rankings list. Who do you got, Ken?
At number 10, I'm going to go, and this kind of hurts my heart to do this, but I'm pulling in Maryland at number 10.
Okay. Maryland is also in my top 10. I will not reveal where they are, but what is it about the Terps, Ken, that kind of has them at that level? Is it the pedigree that Coach Loxley's got going on out there? They obviously have a lot of things they're transitioning with right now in terms of moving on from quarterback Talia Tagovailoa. What kind of has stood out to you without Maryland?
It's really Talia leaving, and I think a lot of people, well, not us, but don't realize that statistically he was the best quarterback within the Big Ten, and losing just the play call. There's a lot of games that he kept them in with his arm. Some games he took him out with his arm. But yeah, I think the question for me will be, and it's funny because we've had Sean Merriman on here a couple times, the amount of talent they can retain in state has always been the focus. But really, can they have that quarterback that's the engine to keep that offense moving? Because Tyler was really the offense last season.
I'd be inclined to agree with that. I think that we've seen kind of their arc, essentially, Ken, has been you have the quarterback play in recent years to really be good, but then you get into those big stages, games against teams like Michigan, Ohio State, and they're very much in those games, right? It's not like they got their doors blown off in either one of those instances. It just so happened they couldn't get the job done. And now without Talia in the fold there at Maryland, I do harbor a lot of questions about whether or not they're going to be able to kind of replace that and to be able to really make that next step as a program. And I'm never going to rule out Mike Loxley on anything like that. The one thing that does kind of work in Maryland's favor this year, and is the reason that I have them up at number 9 on my power ranking list, they have a pretty easy schedule, all things considered. Like, they've got 2 really tough road games this season. They do have to play at Oregon, rather, and then at Penn State. But outside of that, they have only one other game against a team that's currently in the top 25, and that's USC, who I think there's a lot of uncertainty about after the departure of Caleb Williams. And so I think that easy schedule, they may be able to stack some wins and get back up to like that 8-4 level. And frankly, if they can get there, I think number 9 in the Big Ten and in, close to the top half of the conference, that's still a pretty solid season, all things considered. And I think it's very reasonable to think they can get there.
It's not an issue. It's kind of the problem with the infusion of these other 4 teams. It seems like Maryland was on the cusp of perhaps getting to where James Franklin got Penn State like 6-7 years ago. Kind of solid, consistently solid. No, we can't beat Ohio State and we can't beat Michigan, but this middle layer right here, we got this carved out basically. And now I wonder, will they get pushed down? Well, I know they're going to kind of get pushed down. So it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward. That's really my question, because this was a team that we were looking for to perhaps become one of those better teams within the Big Ten moving forward.
And of course, you still have Roman Hemby there, who is a tremendous running back. And I know we made a lot last season of Maryland being able to run the ball at times and to really milk clock. And that was really critical against teams like Ohio State. And so I think that's also another really big thing to kind of keep in mind. And speaking of teams that can run the ball and really kind of, made us really happy as football fans last season, I have Rutgers at number 10 on my list. I think that the Scarlet Knights have, and look, I was really tempted to put them higher than what I have them at. But think about it, Ken, like they still have Kyle Monangai, who had a phenomenal season running the ball last year. They brought in Ethan Kelly-McManus as a transfer quarterback to take over that starting quarterback position. You look up and down their team, they have plenty of guys who do have returning experience in really key roles. Like you think of Flip Dixon at safety is another guy that really jumps out to me. They still have Aaron Lewis around. This Rutgers team, I do feel like, is that other team in the Big Ten where I really could see them making a jump forward this season and really kind of surprising some people. And we kind of were talking a little bit about, whether or not a schedule was going to reveal anything about a team. Rutgers, according to some metrics, has the easiest schedule in the entire Big Ten. The only two ranked teams they have on their schedule right now are USC and Washington, and one of those games is at home. So you want to talk about a team that could potentially make some really serious hay and be able to avoid some of the heavy hitters in the Big Ten. Rutgers definitely on that list, man. So I know I have them at number 10. I easily could have seen a scenario where maybe I moved them up to number 7 or number 8, honestly.
They're not in my top 10, just to give you to let you know that. I know
Okay.
this is your squad.
They are.
Greg Schiano's gonna have to show it to me, and I hear everything you say about the top 25 only having 2 teams there. I have to really see it. And also I think that they're going to be the teams that aren't ranked from the Big Ten, I think are still going to be tough outs this year.
I agree.
Michigan, I'm not trying to poo-poo on anybody. We have to see what's happening with schools like Michigan State, schools near and dear to us too, schools here in the state of Illinois. But the thing is, they're not easy outs.
No.
U of I and Northwestern can run it up on you if need be. So with that, I don't think there's not a lot of easy outs, and I think there are going to be teams that get walloped upside the head, and we were going to be like, man, you had an easy schedule. But I don't think the bottom feeders, quote unquote, within the Big Ten are going to be easy outs this come Saturday or whenever they play, since they play almost every day except for Monday.
I was going to say a lot of Friday games in the Big Ten this season, so you'll definitely have to pay attention to that. I did have Northwestern at number 11. They were my first team that I basically knocked out. I thought that David Braun did a phenomenal job last year, the way that he got that team to pull together after all of the drama and all of the issues, the turmoil that team faced. I think that they're in a very solid position as a football program right now. I think the thing to me with them, it was a little bit of that issue of kind of the off-field stuff, the playing at different places for your home games and kind of that uncertainty. And I do think that lends itself well to that idea of kind of banding together again, the us against the world mentality. It's like, look, we don't even have, a home barn to, go to this season. We're playing games at a Temp Stadium on the Lakeshore. We're playing freaking Ohio State and Illinois at Wrigley Field. Like, they're going to have all of these like kind of different obstacles get thrown their way. But I still think Northwestern could certainly make some noise this season. And I think being number 11 on this list is kind of indicative that I feel like they have arguments to be in that top 10. I just didn't quite have the Cats there. And I got to be honest with you, Ken, I didn't put Illinois anywhere near my top 10 this season. You want to talk about a team that's got to prove a lot to me. You had some big losses the year before last season and still were close to bowl eligibility. Now you've also lost Isaiah Williams. You've also lost Keith Ferguson, and you've lost, or Keith Randolph rather. And then you, most importantly, lost Johnny Newton too. And it's like, you got a lot of dudes that you're going to have to really replace in a short amount of time. And I know Brett Bielema is a very solid recruiter. He's able to do some good work, and they have some continuity at quarterback, but I'm just not seeing it from the Illini. That's the team to me, Ken. They really need to kind of step up and to prove it this season. And so those are my kind of thoughts on the in-state teams. Did you have either one of them in your top 10?
No, no. Everything you said about U of I is the same way that I feel. And as you mentioned, you lost your interior defensive line, but the season before you lost your defensive backfield. There's a lot of questions now. Your running back transferred. It'll be interesting to see, who's going to step up at receiver. Isaiah Williams may not have been a world beater to a lot, but he was a fan favorite between you and I here as just a steady Eddie, a guy that could really show up and bail you out. He was a hellified bail you outer. Is that make up a word? No, and I'll say this about Northwestern. I think what'll happen with Northwestern, I don't know if their record will signify that they band together, but I think the following season you'll see improvements because of what you said, as far as them being kind of homeless or shelterless, I meant to say, as having a home field right now. I think that you'll see them talk about, this and this and how it benefited them. Particularly, we forget, they're still going through a head coaching change in the second year. That was unexpected, to say the least, with the hazing. So, and believe me, look, I really tried, James, not to put my heart in this one. I tried to take my heart out because my next school is gonna you're gonna know it hurts me to say this. But I'm ready to move on. Are you ready to move on to my number 9?
Yeah, I did want to get to the in-state stuff. I know that, again, we're based in Chicago. We have to pay close attention to them. And so when we said top 10, we ultimately had to talk about 12 teams, period, end of sentence. So yes, Ken, I very much would like to know who you've got at number 9.
They border us. And I hate saying this because I part of me really loves this school. It's Wisconsin. I have Wisconsin.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Please expound, my friend.
You know what? I'm taking a wait and see approach with this offense, James, to be honest with you. Okay. I know Chaz is returning, so you'll have the Lightning returning as far as the running back. I have to see if they can get it done under center. I know it's supposed to be a mixture. It's just not supposed to be straight air raid. I need some of the air in the raid for me to really start, because at one point it's either or. Are we a grinded, hard-nosed, run the ball, run the air out of the stadium team, or are we this hybrid mixture? And I haven't seen the hybrid mixture yet. So my heart wants to have Wisconsin a lot higher and say, because they're Wisconsin, they insulate their state, they do a good job. That I could have Wisconsin as high as like 5 or 6 on here. I'm taking a harder stance against Wisconsin, and I promise you, I hope Wisconsin proves me wrong, because it's one of my favorite college teams. Let me take away the Big Ten part out of it. It's one of my favorite college teams because it's close to us, and they have a really good football and basketball program.
You're gonna laugh when I tell you this. I basically, my 5 to 8, I feel like could be in pretty much any order. And I think that, I would be totally okay saying it. I had Wisconsin number 5 in my ranking. And I am freely going to recognize what you said about kind of the transition that offense continues to make, and the transition they started making last year with Tanner Mordecai at quarterback. And now they brought in Tyler Van Dyke from Miami. And I think that is going to ultimately help them. I do think that is a more solid option for the type of offense that they want to run. They have a very veteran-laden offensive line, which I really like, especially if you want to get Chez Malusi running the ball early and often. I do think that's a good call by you to mention him specifically. I think their defense also has a lot of veteran leadership on it, and they've brought in just so many talented transfers as well to kind of provide some backfill on that roster and to give them a little bit more depth. I acknowledge that uncertainty is really hard to kind of square with what I'm saying about them being my number 5 team in the conference. And they also, let us not forget, have games against Oregon. They play Alabama this season up in Camp Randall. They've got Penn State coming up to Camp Randall as well. The good thing for them is that those games are at home. Imagine going into, Bryant-Denny Stadium, going into Autzen Stadium, like that, Happy Valley. I mean, for God's sake, like that would be a murderer's row of the schedule. But all of those teams come to Wisconsin. And so I think they have the opportunity to at least be competitive in those games and to really showcase kind of what they've got as a team. And so I look at Wisconsin as a group that could take a step forward under Luke Fickell this season with a better quarterback under center. And so I've got them at number 5. My number 8 team, Ken, I'm curious where you've got them ranked. I've got the Nebraska Cornhuskers at number 8. I do think that's another team that a lot of folks have had questions about, how everything's going to kind of come together under Matt Rule. Tons of hype, of course, around Dylan Raiola at quarterback. They still do have some other guys on that roster I find very fascinating. The Gabe Irvins of the world, for instance, or you look on the defensive side of things, just you look at, the talented linebackers that they have, some good senior leadership in that portion of the football field. And I just think that Nebraska is going to break their bowl drought this season. I don't think there's any doubt about that to me. The thing is I just think they're heaping a lot of pressure onto Dylan Raiola's shoulders very early. This is a football crazy place. And if he ends up playing well, they're going to deify him out there in the Great Plains. I just think that maybe this is the season you slowly start to see the building blocks settle into place. And that's why I've got them at number 8.
Okay. I don't have them at number 8. I actually have them at number 7.
Okay.
And I'll stick with them. Everything you said, Dylan Raiola. I'm here. I'm waiting to see what's happening. It's the flip of Wisconsin in a way. It's just, to me, I can see where they're going. Like I can see Matt Rule, and the direction is closer to what I feel like Wisconsin is telling me where they want to go with the style of play that they want to play with.
Ooh, okay. I like that, dude.
So that's why and I said this to you, like, dog, if you asked me to put money on somebody awakening Nebraska, I could not give you that money. And I mean, for anybody that grew up when Nebraska, well, one of the times Nebraska was Nebraska. I mean, I'm not that old, but the last time Nebraska, Tom Osborne had Nebraska pumping, how, like, some schools, due to location, sometimes it's harder for them to have a resurgence because they're not on the coast, the weather isn't warm, something to that degree, or maybe the state that the population isn't as dense. But Nebraska, Matt Rule seems like he has the trick for Nebraska. Perhaps they're not back all the way, but I kind of believe it, James. So I have Nebraska for me at number 7, because I think it, and also Matt Rule this is what he does. Leave the pros alone, but he's a program turner arounder. All right.
Yep.
At number 8 at number 8 for me, I have the Trojans.
Okay.
I have USC, and this is actually based on Caleb being there for the time that he was there. I feel like Lincoln Riley's offense is going to, and I think the same with Oregon, and we'll get to that level way further down.
Mm-hmm.
I think the flip side of one of the discussions that you and I have had all throughout last year, because we've been always talking about these teams coming to the Big Ten, and the lead thing was the trenches. Yep. And even though SC didn't have name quality, this year Jordan Addison already left to become a Minnesota Viking. They didn't have the crazy names at the skill position. They still had the guys that were catching the receptions from Caleb Williams. And really, I'm talking about the style of play. They still had that style of play. Now, I don't know if it'll be as much hero ball this season, but they know how to win through the air. And I think that's going to be hard on some slow-scoring Big Ten schools. So for me, and this is a real team that I had to move around not up and down my board, but from the middle to the back, I had to really play with where I was putting SC at, because I still feel like there's talent still as SC. This will be Lincoln Riley's 3rd year as the head coach. I wonder, and I hope perhaps if we talk to someone out from that program, we can find out has there been a benefit or added by them joining the Big Ten as far as recruitment sake. But yeah, I have SC as my number 8 squad.
I am fully buying into the Miller Moss hype from the Trojans. I think that you mentioned it perfectly when you mentioned that Lincoln Riley is a guy who just historically always gets the best out of his quarterbacks. You just have to look back at Baker Mayfield, your Kyler Murray's, your Caleb Williams's. Like, this guy historically just gets great performances out of his quarterbacks. And so I look at Miller Moss and I just think to myself that this is like the logical next step in that process. You saw the rave reviews coming out about him out of spring football for the Trojans. Like, that is a team, they really are going to rally behind him. And it really seems as though he's going to be a guy who's going to turn a lot of heads this season, a lot of those West Coast games. The one thing I do have to point out is like there are concerns about just kind of the lack of experience in terms of their wide receiver group. Totally understand that. But I'm also with you where like a playmaking quarterback can ultimately, make up for a lot of those shortcomings and really allow somebody to kind of jump out ahead of the field and to really kind of showcase their stuff. And if there's a team that can really turn that out, I do think it is USC. I actually have them as my number 6 team this season, right behind Wisconsin. Like I said, I easily could have flip-flopped the two of them, had the Trojans in my top 5, but I really do like USC's chances a lot, even though they've got a really tough schedule this year. They're two of their non-conference games this season, Ken, just against teams named LSU and Notre Dame. No big deal. I mean, that's child's play, surely, for a team of USC's caliber. My number 7 team, and one that we have not discussed yet, is another team that is going through a lot of transitions right now, and that is the Washington Huskies, who not only have to replace Michael Penix Jr., but they've also got to replace Roma Dunze now that he's going to be catching balls up here in Chicago. They did bring in Will Rogers, who I'm very high on. I think that is a great kind of placeholder, very similar to the way Oregon ended up stepping in with Bo Nix to kind of really fill that role and to give them an instant injection of gravitas and starting experience. I really do like that, but I have them at number 7 because I just kind of need to see how all of the pieces are going to ultimately fall together for the Huskies.
I have Washington as my 6th ranked. No, wait. Actually, I have Washington as my 5th ranked team.
There you go.
You know what? It's style of play. And now this is something that we'll all have to find out, because you mentioned the defections, and that wasn't even the coaching staff, right? So
that's very true.
Style, but again, if they're still a pass happy squad, and we saw towards the end that their trenches held up, like that was a question in the playoffs was, well, how fortified are they going to be in the trenches? And their trenches on both sides of the ball until the last game, but on both sides of the ball really held up better than we expected. It's the passing attack. If SC and Washington, and it could be at oranges and oranges compared, but if their passing attacks are 80% of what they were last year, that's going to be a problem for some Big Ten schools. Like, that's just outside of like the top schools, because it's, can you run it up, or do you have Iowa? Are you Iowa's defense and special teams? To a degree. Also, again, it's how effective these schools are going to be running the football to perhaps keep those offenses off the field. But I have to kind of see Washington is I'll be honest. I am paying respect to schools that did something last year, because they still do have, even though players defected or transferred is a better way for me to say it. It's not defection. They still have some of that leadership on those rosters, and they still have young athletes who have went through the rigors of the battles that those teams have went to in the playoffs as consistently as Washington has been in the playoffs. And Washington has turned over from coaches before and still been a really good college football program. So I'm going off of the fact that this isn't just, this coach made us prominent, that's why we're here. No, this school has a way of, unfortunately, being a very good stepping stone. And I think they will remain, but I can understand, and this is a fluid list, everybody. This isn't set in stone. I could understand if they end up further down, but going off of what consistency they've been able to do the last 3 seasons, I got to give them props, and I have them rated as my 5th squad. As my, I already said my 7th squad, and I already gave you why. Nebraska was my 7th team.
Who's your number 6, Ken? I think that was the only one that maybe we
I mentioned them. My number 6 is Iowa.
Thank you.
It's that defense. If they can score 22 points, it's going to be a problem for some people. All right. If the defense is the same defense that they've been putting out, if they can score, which, hey, that's a rarity. But if they can score, they have arguably the best defense within the Big Ten, one of the better defenses outside of Kirby Smart in college football. That's just period. One thing you can say about Iowa, man, they can defend their what's off. And I'm riding high off of, they were terrible last year, right? And then out of nowhere, here they are almost making it into the playoffs, like making it to the Big Ten championship game, rather. And I know that's because it was heavier on one side than the other, but still, for a team to be as down as Iowa was, we were kicking them into the curb, and they found a way. And if they can score this year and their defense holds up, I got Iowa as my 6th team within the Big Ten. I'm also paying respects to squads that have been here and done it. So I'm just giving them their props in my opinion.
I mean, I never asked you for a ruling on this, Ken, and I probably should have before we even started this entire exercise. And it was whether or not you would allow ties for rankings, because the way that I look at Iowa is probably very similar to the way that I look at Wisconsin, where you're still kind of trying to figure out what, like, the things that they do well, but you also know the things that they want to do well. And so you kind of have to like balance those two things out. And so I basically had them interchangeable with Wisconsin in that number 5. And I'm almost willing to say like maybe I would do like a tie for 5th in my rankings if that's something that you would permit. And I think everything you brought up about him is just so on point. And like you almost got me to break that tie, but I'm like, no, like I really feel like they're in that kind of like that same boat, man.
Let me ask you this though. Okay, so what is it that Wisconsin does that you're like, I know Wisconsin will do that getting off the bus for sure?
I still think that they're going to be able to run the ball with the talent that they have, especially considering how veteran laden their offensive line is. I feel like that's always something that they are going to be able to fall back on. And I know they no longer have Braylon Allen. That is, of course, a massive loss for that offense. But I think ultimately Chez Malusi is going to be able to really run the ball effectively for them. And I think that's something that I'm just going to look to for them. And if their receivers are having a rough day, I feel like Tyler Van Dyke can simply turn around and hand that ball to Chez and see what he can do. I think that ultimately, to me, is one thing that I definitely look at with them.
And I agree. But with the spread offense being as central as it is in college football, and kind of leveling the playing field. And one of the reasons Nick Saban got tired of this, outside of all the transfer portal stuff, but that was the beginning. All right. The spread, He didn't like it. He didn't want it to spread. I wonder sometimes, even being a great running team, if there's gonna be enough time on the clock, depending on how many turnovers you may have already committed and if they've scored on those turnovers, but also if another team has ran it up. On the flip side with Iowa, when I'm saying their defense, I'm talking about the whole defensive side of the ball, not just one part of it. So that's where, for me, I feel like they get off the bus stifling teams, like just stifling, where you could say this because you have a bad defensive game, but I think it's easier for the run game not to click, or you to be able to take the run game off because you've run the score up on the team compared to a team that has layers on defense that can play the way to Iowa. So that's why, for me, I'll give Iowa that props. And look, and again, when it comes to Wisconsin, I'm saying this, I want to be wrong when it comes to Wisconsin. I honestly really do.
I do think the one thing I have to give Iowa some credit for is we've talked about a lot of the turnover at a lot of the schools that we've discussed so far. And yes, they do have to kind of now deal without Eric All, and then most especially Cooper DeJean on their roster. They do still have Cade McNamara. They do still have Caleb Johnson and LaShawn Williams. They have Luke Lachey. They have some continuity on that offense. And I know they were not a great offensive team last season, but with the number of injuries that they had last year and kind of the game plans that we just kind of shook our heads about, I feel like there's got to be something better there with the incumbents that they have on that offense. And I definitely am of the opinion that we will see more out of them as we go into the current college football season. And now, Ken, as we really get into the meat of our top 5, I do have to ask you, is there any team outside of your top 5 you could see getting into the college football playoff this season?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, outside of my top 5, I would have to go with, it's got to be Iowa or Nebraska, to be honest with you. Those are the teams, because I don't think defensively SC is going to be able to get better. And I know with the transfer portal you can do it. I think offensively they'll be able to be the team that Lincoln Riley hasn't playing yet. I don't know if they can get that defense right right now. With Wisconsin, I hope and pray Wisconsin can be that team. I think it's still early in this new program. And Maryland, I wish Maryland would, because
Me too.
There's just something about Maryland I enjoy. And your team, Rutgers, I would like to see if Greg Schiano could get them back to where he had them before he left to go to the NFL. But I haven't seen enough, even though, as you said, they have a really easier schedule. So, no, really, if I'm being yes, if I'm being honest, it's Iowa and Nebraska. And I guess if I had to choose, I really want to go Nebraska because it's new and it's shiny and it's the old blue blood being brought back to life. But Iowa, I'll go and say it's Iowa because I know what that defense can do. And if they can score over 20 points consistently, they can have double-digit victories this year. They can have 3 losses or something to that effect. But if they can score points, it's going to be hard. And one thing that listen, they produce kids. Some positions at Iowa, it doesn't matter who's coming out that year. Just get them, right? Like, just grab them. All right, so definitely the tight end. Get the tight end. You know what I'm saying? One of those linemen, go ahead and grab one of them D linemen. He's going to be up there throwing somebody. It would probably be, if you put my feet to the fire, it would be Iowa, even though I want to say Nebraska, but that's more because Nebraska is a shiny new toy.
The thing I love about Nebraska is like all of the turnover and then the skill that they have at that coaching position. I'm never going to rule out a team that has a potentially game-changing quarterback. I think that you're talking about a 12-team playoff, and you got to remember, even if they don't get into the Big Ten championship game, even if they finish 3rd or 4th in that conference, they still could conceivably get into the playoff if they play well enough, if they have a good enough resume. And so I'm right there with you on Nebraska potentially being that team. I also do think that your points earlier about Jed Fish and kind of the coaching change at Washington, but the culture that they were able to kind of keep over after being their national runner-up last season. Maybe Washington sneaks into this thing. Like, I think that Nebraska is probably the main team that I would go with there, but I think Washington is right on their heels. All right, Ken, I think we both hit our number 5 teams in our ranking. I think that it's time to get into the top 4. And I think, again, I talked about the kind of combination of those 5 through 8 teams, and you kind of flip them into any order you want. I do think, to a degree, probably the 3rd and 4th teams, I'm guessing in the Big Ten, we could probably do the same interchangeable thing. But who do you have as your number 4 team?
National champs, Michigan.
All right. Ditto. Same.
Sherrod Moore. There's a lot of turnover, but one, he's the lead recruiter. You got to think that those cupboards are still got some guys, particularly in the trenches. Like, they got big dudes just lined up somewhere under the big house, just waiting to get out. So I think I can't knock them all the way down. So I have Michigan. They're national champions. These kids have been through the fire. They've earned it the long way. I don't care what happened. They had to earn it on the field. They earned it on the field. They had to beat Ohio State. They learned how to beat Ohio State. They deserve their props. If they didn't have one of the best coaches in college football leave them, I would probably have them maybe in my top 2. I think Jim Harbaugh leaving is big. It's huge. And that's not a knock on Sherrod Moore, because we even saw how I think anyone that's viewed Jim Harbaugh's career, me since he was a player at Michigan, a quarterback for the Bears, drafted by the Bears, but returning to college, San Diego State, why am I blanking out on the night? Stanford, and then Michigan after the 49ers. You saw the growth, but when he got to Michigan, you saw failure too. And for me, on the outside looking in, I thought people talking about him leaving prior to this past season was crazy, because I didn't think they could find someone that could do what he did. And he took that to another level. And there's growth in him in learning a better way. And being less conservative, as we've seen Ryan Day become at certain moments when you need to go for the opposing team's jugular. So for me, that's really the big thing. It's Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh's exit is huge. I'm looking forward to see what the brother Sherrod Moore does there. But that's a lot of weight, and the expectations are bananas at Michigan, and they just won a national title. So I don't know if that's going to be a honeymoon as much as, or is it going to be a feverish feed me Seymour, give me more type of scenario when it comes to what's going to happen with the Wolverines, James? Who do you have it for?
I would very much love it if we could get on an expert to talk about Michigan's absolutely bonkers recruiting class they've got coming in for next year, winning that natty. There was no let up from the Harbaugh regime to the Moore regime. And I think that that's going to be a team that's going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of years to come in the Big Ten. But I look at two key things in having Michigan at number 4. I really thought about putting them at number 3 because I know their offensive line is going to look so radically different this season. They had so many guys go to the NFL that made massive contributions for them throughout the season. Of course, their quarterback, JJ McCarthy also went to the NFL. Blake Corum's in the NFL. They've had so many big turnover pieces, but you have so many guys who are going to get better opportunities to get some real run this season. You look at Donovan Edwards, for example, at running back, could have a phenomenal season. You still have Mason Graham on that defense, and I think he could be a real catalyst there. You also still have Will Johnson, who could end up being one of the best cornerbacks in the entire country. They've still got some real serious weapons there at Michigan, and I was very tempted to put them at number 3. But then you always have to remember the fact that they not only have to play Ohio State at Ohio State this season, you've also got Texas and Oregon on your schedule this season. These schedule makers were not kind to the Wolverines. You want to talk about a team, they get wins in 2 of those games, Ken. They've got a very, very realistic possibility to be in the number 1 team in the college football playoff. That is a resume stacker if you can get a couple of wins out of those games, especially with how highly touted Texas and Oregon are this season. I look at Michigan and their path is right in front of them to demonstrate that they can run it back and do something in an incredible way. I completely understand the people that have skepticism about that happening. I have them at number 4, basically for that reason, that I think that road's going to be a really hard one to travel, but I do think they will find some successes along the way.
Well put. Well put. And it'll be interesting to see if they can take down Texas and Oregon. The crazy part, I'll say this, that Texas game has upset written all over it.
Oh, yeah.
And I hate saying that about Texas because they haven't done anything since Vince Young was there, but it just seems like that riding high. I don't know if they're built for riding high, particularly with the boogeyman being Alabama, not being Alabama anymore, and being that victory that used to help these teams be like, look, we beat Bama. That beating Bama isn't going to be as nice as it used to seem. So I'm interested to see what Michigan can do versus Quinn Ewers and that Texas roster.
We will certainly see about Alabama this season. I wonder if maybe I have them in slightly higher esteem than you do, but we'll leave that one for another podcast. We've still got a top 3 to get into. Ken, I'm very curious if you and I share the same number 3. Please tell the listeners who you have in that spot.
Oh, we're going out to Happy Valley, baby.
You know it, baby.
James Franklin, Drew Aller. We're going out to Happy Valley. They still got something to prove. You may not have to go through the big boys like you used to, but you got to still prove it. So I have Penn State. Pulling up 3rd in my top 10. I think, listen, if they can take another step on offense, we already know what they can do on defense. Now you have Abdul Carter moving over to edge rusher. Be interesting to see how they use him. Interesting to see how this defense performs after losing your defensive coordinator. But still, I'm looking forward to seeing what James Franklin and the Nittany Lions can do. I root crazy for the Nittany Lions. It's been something that's been part of me for a long time. So we'll see. A part of me is yes, but I'll be honest with you. A part of me is like, you don't even have any excuses. And if you fall on your face, I'm really going to feel a certain kind of way, Coach Franklin and the rest of it. For real.
Do not let my friend Ken Davis down, Mr. Franklin. One of the easiest schedules in the Big Ten this season. I think realistically, their only truly difficult game this season is against Ohio State at home. I know they have to play USC, but that Ohio State game, that's the only one you really circle on their schedule and go, this is it. This is where I think, we're going to kind of see the real Penn State. But I mean, just the number of returning guys that you boast on both sides of the football. I know they had some losses on the defensive side of things to the NFL draft, but that offense is absolutely loaded. It's ready. I think that is hugely important to them. I love bringing in Tom Allen to replace Manny Diaz. I thought that was a really solid move by Penn State. It gives you a guy with a lot of gravitas to be your defensive coordinator. I think that is a really solid development for them. I did also want to make a note about Andy Kotelnicki coming in from Kansas to be the offensive coordinator. I loved what he was able to do with the Jayhawks offense last season. I think that could really look great for Penn State this season. And I do think that Drew Aller, I think he takes that step forward this year. I think all of the physical gifts are there for him to make that leap. And I think you couple that with kind of the weaker schedule that they are going to face as opposed to the real gauntlet they've had to go through in recent seasons. I not only think that Penn State is my number 3 team in the Big Ten, I think there's a real solid argument to be made. They're competing for the Big Ten championship in that title game in December. And I think they get into the college football playoff with relative ease, so long as they, don't experience a ton of, pitfalls with injuries, et cetera. So I had Penn State at number 3, but it was very, very close to me putting them at the top 2.
Yeah. That's all I got. Yeah. So we get down to these last 2. Let's jump straight into that one because I want to see if we're aligned with this. I feel like we won't be.
I kind of agree with you, actually, that we may not be. I'm going to, you know what, Ken, do you want to reveal your number 2 team or do you want to reveal your number 1 team? How do you want to do this?
My number 1 team is Oregon.
Okay. Let me hear it, man. Why do you got the Ducks at number 1?
You know what? They went through it last year. Like, I'm just being,
and
this is the thing too. I'm being slight. I'm not even gonna say I'm being a jerk. I'm being a realist. You look at the amount of talent that Ohio State had last year, and they have more talent this year. But the question is Ryan Day, and I have to see if Ryan Day is going to look at that talent look at those young men, right, and on the staff, young men and women, but on the field, look at those young men and say, you know what? Excuse me. There may be risk, but there's no reason for me to have this allotment of talent and not exploit it by letting the ball rise through the air, by taking like the whole. I remember NFL teams wanting him prior to Urban Meyer leaving to come and be offensive coordinator. What happened to that prospect of a coach? So for me, I have to know if Ryan. I know what Urban Meyer could do. All right, I know what he can do, and I'll say this: as far as recruiting, it hasn't dropped because I've said it on here before. That Urban Meyer and some of you Ohio State people could be upset, but it's just the real. That Urban Meyer recruitment was not like that Jim Tressel recruitment. That was a whole nother level of what Urban Meyer was bringing up there. Like these kids was fine. This wasn't a bunch of Midwest kids. These kids from all the sunniest places in the country. All right. So I have to see on the field, can Ryan Day do what needs to be done? Because I think he's had the prerequisite weapons. I feel like he's gotten in his own head at times. Now, it could be perhaps who the single caller was while he was timid to a degree of a fear of giving the game away. But that's also a problem with you recruiting if you didn't think you had him. Because it's no reason to have Ohio State's receiving core. Any year, just name it. But it's no reason to have whatever kids are in that receiving room and not light up any other team on the opposite side of the ball, let alone to go with the fact that you're going to have a nice couple running backs. So for me, when I look at Oregon getting back to why I have them at number 1, guess who didn't leave, right? Could have went to Alabama. Nah, I'm building what I'm building right here. Another program that can be viewed at times as a stepping stone. And I mean this in a positive, because these guys mess around and go to the pros out of Oregon. Excuse me. But when we know the money, when you're talking about Nike and Phil Knight, but just this is one of the better iterations of Oregon. It doesn't feel gimmicky. You have 2 nice quarterbacks. You have an offense that you've been running to success. Yes, the single caller has moved on to the pros, but still you know what you're doing. So for me, I'm going to give it to the team that was almost in the big game last year, and I'm going to give it to Oregon. I am worried as far as trench strength, so it'll be interesting to see. But they still got Nike money. We can buy some hogs here over at Oregon. So I went Oregon as my number one school, and I taken a wait and see approach when it comes to Ohio State. I have Ohio State at number 2. So let you know what I think about you. I think Ohio State should be one when I think about the talent that they've infused with the talent they already had. But I still have to see if Ryan Day can execute at the big game and get them over the hump to get them in a national championship game and or win the national championship.
I think bringing in Dylan Gabriel was a phenomenal stroke of genius by Dan Lanning. I think he is going to fit in seamlessly. I think that Oregon offense is going to be humming from day one with him under center. The things that I worry about with Oregon are honestly very similar to things I worry about with some other schools in the Big Ten. I mentioned offensive line turnover. Oregon's going to have a lot of that this season, very similarly to Michigan. Their defense, their secondary is basically going to look brand new, very similar to what Penn State is going to have to deal with. It is the fact that you have the combination of those two things and also entering a new conference that's going to make more demands of you from a defensive perspective, and the number of new faces that Oregon has on that side of the football. I have them at number 2 because I think they are an incredibly talented team. But I look at what Ohio State is bringing back this season in terms of their offensive line, their offensive skill players, your Emeka Egbukas, for example, your Trevion Hendersons. They bring in a guy like Will Howard at quarterback. They still have the incredibly talented pass rushers like your Jack Sawyers, your JT Tuimoloaus. You've got really strong secondary play. You brought in Caleb Downs, lest we forget, just an absolute coup in the transfer portal, getting him in there. I look at Ohio State and I just look at a team that has all of these pieces to succeed. And then you add on top of that Chip Kelly in an offensive coordinator role, not in the head coaching role. That Ohio State team is going to be downright lethal offensively this season. And I think that all the returning talent that they have on defense, to me, Ohio State is the most complete team in the Big Ten. And you kind of said this in a way that really resonated with me, where it seems like on paper they should be the number 1 team in the conference. I think that they are. And I think that those guys that they've brought back, they have enough of a track record, Ken, where I'm willing to put them in that number 1 spot. And so I do have the Buckeyes at number 1, and I do have Oregon at number 2.
Understandable. Like I said, I want to see it. They're the most talented team in the Big Ten, but to be honest, haven't they been the most talented team in the past and still not won?
Not wrong. Not wrong, my friend.
It's I have to, and I wonder how much will there be pushback, or not even pushback. Will there still be, because the thing is this with the coordinator, as a head coach, I still have to tell you to go for it or not go for it. Mm-hmm. You know, that so Chip Kelly can have a great game plan, but if it's one, we need to go vertical and I'm hesitant, or if it's a 4th down we need to go for and I'm hesitant. Even if you're running Chip's scheme, but are you still playing the way that we've seen Ryan coaching the way that we've seen Ryan Day do it in a conservative manner? And that's really why they're not number 1 for me. And that could just be Jim Harbaugh, right? It could be Harbaughlitis got him and Harbaugh's gone and that problem is gone. It could be, but sometimes those issues become bigger than just an opponent. It becomes a situation, a type of situation. And when you encounter that situation again, how do you execute during that situation? So when it's a big game for Ohio State, will they just play freely? And that's the question for me, James.
I literally can. This entire conversation has made me so excited for football this season. We are 52 days away from the start of the college football season. We are less than 7 weeks away from Rutgers and Howard kicking off the Big Ten slate. You also have Minnesota and North Carolina rematching on Thursday, August 29th. And then you've got Illinois and Eastern Illinois. You've got 3 Big Ten games on the first, in that first week, that week 1 window. I absolutely cannot wait for college football this season. Ken, this was an awesome conversation. Really excited to see how that all shakes out. And then in the weeks and days to come, we are going to be doing a lot of preview work, getting you guys ready for this college football season. We will also have Big Ten Media Days coming up soon. We will get to hear from all of the coaches. We're going to hear from players. We're going to get a really good sense of where this conference is heading now that we have 18 teams that Ken and I are going to have to try to cover this season. Whew. Boy, Ken, I hope you and I are enjoying our time, with family and stuff, because once college football Saturdays roll around in August, our loved ones will not be hearing a lot from us. And our text thread is going to be jumping, my friends. Yeah. So any final thoughts before we put a bow on this bad boy?
Not at all, man. I love your thoughts and getting a difference of opinion. It gives me a better way to kind of look at some things different from how I view them. So always is a great time chatting up and talking some sports with my dude.
Absolutely love it, my friend. All right, guys, we will talk to you later this week on a new episode of Big Ten Country. And like I said, be sure to be following us, because we are going to have a lot of really great preview content coming from you as we get ready for college football season.
Congrats, you finished the video. If you want to build on that success, download the NBC Sports Chicago app. It's got highlights, exclusive insights, and push alerts tailored to you. Everything you need to be a real Chicago sports fan. Download it now.